Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 18th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the generic congressional vote and the generic ballot for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, I've made a number of videos talking about how the Republican Party has a fundamental problem when it comes down to the inability of them to win over voters the same way they did in 2010 and 2014. And it causes a lot of strife, I think, amongst the Republican Party being unable to figure out what exactly is going wrong when they find that in terms of Joe Biden's approval rating, he's down about 10 points nationwide, but on the generic ballot, they can only take a lead of about 2 points nationwide amongst the same exact polls. Now, I thought it would be interesting today to take a look at the individual crosstabs breakdown of all of these people that were voting in these polls, that were giving answers and responses to these callers, giving them an answer about why they voted, or at least how they voted, and seeing them sorted into different groups. Because it provides a lot of context and a lot of needed context, I would say, for what we should look at when we're looking at the generic congressional vote. The Democrats at this point in time aren't in the lead. I think the Republican Party actually has a lead larger than 2 to 3 points nationwide. I think they're hovering somewhere around 5 points. But 5 points still isn't Biden being down by 10. And if we're being completely honest about the approval rating of Biden, it probably is lower than the polls actually predict. So if the polls are off by a certain amount, you could expect the generic congressional vote to be off by a similar amount, and you still wouldn't reach them at the same point. The fact is, there are voters in this country that don't back Joe Biden, but also don't back the Republican Party. And it's a very different story from what they were told, the Republicans being they, back in 2010 and 2014. Now, if you take a look back at 2014, we were in a position where the Republicans were up by a similar amount they are right now. But when it came down to individual Senate races and governor races, Republicans were practically performing at peak performance. You saw numerous races decided at poll closing simply because pollsters were telling us that Republicans were going to obliterate their Democratic opponents. And that's exactly what happened. When it comes down to our Senate elections now, you simply aren't seeing it. This hesitancy isn't just nationwide, it's also statewide. And again, it is a question that Republicans continuously ask themselves, why is it here? 2010 was a bit of a different situation. Republicans were averaging, by the day of the election, up 9.4% nationwide. Keep in mind, at this point in time, Obama was only disapproved of by about 5 to 6 points. So to see the public turn against you by a larger margin than they disapprove of you tells you that there are voters out there that approved of Biden that voted for the GOP back in 2010. I think a lot of that can also be contributed to the fact that the Democratic Party majority was a lot larger than it is now. Democrats had over 250 seats in the House. They had 60 seats in the Senate for a brief period of time at a default of 59. And the Democrats were practically just having the ability to do whatever they wanted. Even though it was really difficult for them to get a lot of legislation passed, they still had the numbers to do so. And the American public turned to them for that exact reason. They thought that things were turning bad under President Obama, and they wanted to see that changed, and they wanted to see that turned around. And consequently, they voted in the Republican Party. Now, looking at the generic congressional vote right now, while it seems similar to 2014, again, there are some major statewide differences that we are seeing. I mean, the most recent poll from the Nevada Independent shows Catherine Cortez Masto up 8 points statewide. So there's definitely a bit of a disconnect here between those who disapprove of Biden and those who are willing to vote for the GOP. Now, to look at two individual polls, I decided to go with the polling company that was closest to the average, and that is Politico Morning Consult. They show the Republican Party ahead by 3, and they have 2,005 registered voters amongst the sample. The Economist YouGov poll is another one I explored. It shows the Democratic Party ahead. It is the only poll that shows the Democratic Party ahead, and I thought it would just be individually interesting to take a look at, simply because it is very much off the average, not at all what we should expect for 2022, but looking at the data might also provide us some context about, again, what is holding up the GOP. We definitely can say that the Economist YouGov poll skews towards the Democratic Party and definitely gives them an advantage that we aren't seeing in practically any other poll, but it will also provide us, an understanding of, hey, what is actually leading the support here for the Democratic Party in the Economist YouGov poll that we might expect to see explain some of the hesitancies and lack of strong numbers for the GOP in other polls. So the first one we're looking at is the Economist YouGov poll, and I first want to point out Joe Biden's approval rating. Now, in this exact poll, you have, again, the Democratic Party up by 3 percentage points nationwide. But when it comes down to Joe Biden's approval rating, here's the actual result. 20% strongly approve and 24% somewhat approve. That's 24% there for Joe Biden. 37%, however, strongly disapprove and 11% somewhat disapprove. You're talking about simply just a 4-point deficit here between those who disapprove and those who approve of Joe Biden. It's not at all really mimicking what we see on the national numbers. The national numbers tell us that Biden is down by about 10 points, which means you can probably expect this to be swung. If it's down by 4, instead of being down by 10, by 6 percentage points. And where does that bring the Economist YouGov poll? To Republican plus 3. It's another reason why I decided to choose it. But showing you this, you find that the sample group here does disapprove of Biden, and it tells you that the Democratic Party is ahead by 3 points. I think this also might tell you that if Biden's approval rating is able to recover, as we have seen with the generic ballot, there is a possibility, and I say this in confidence, that the Democratic Party does reclaim the lead in opinion polling data, but realistically probably still isn't going to win the national popular vote, at least easily. It will take a lot of turning around, and the election is, you're talking months away. It's not going to be easy, and I don't think it's a likely outcome at this point in time. But let's go ahead and see if we can find the generic ballot. There's about 300 pages here, so we're going to have to go back to the table of contents here to actually take a look at what the generic ballot is telling us. But I guess we actually don't really need to. Most of my points are going to be made on this second poll, which I find to be more accurate. I just simply wanted to explore that for the interest of doing so and showing you a bit about what a swing would actually look like and how Joe Biden's approval rating plays into the voters in that state. In that poll. Looking at the numbers from the Politico Morning Consult poll, you find that what we are currently looking at here is the generic ballot question. Now, I would first like to preface this by saying that I've already looked at the Joe Biden approval rating numbers. You can find this on the Real Clear Politics website if you don't believe me, but it shows a Biden approval rating of 41% and a disapproval rating of 55%. So Biden is down about 14 points in this poll. The national average has him down by about 10, but I do trust him being down by 14 more than I trust him being down simply by 4, because polls do fluctuate a little bit above 10 pretty frequently, and I would say it isn't exactly too out of the ordinary. You're talking about a 4-point swing versus a 6-point swing, but it is a 4-point swing that it is in a much more believable direction, because Biden isn't exactly tracking on doing better than where he was in months past. But looking at the generic congressional vote here, it does an amazing job at breaking down by age, generation, by political party affiliation, and gender, by ideology, by educational background, by income level, by ethnicity. And what you're seeing here is that this breakdown might reveal, or at least could reveal, why the Democratic Party has an ability to maintain themselves around 40%, and the Republican Party isn't able to take advantage of that and really defeat them across the nation. Now, the Democratic Party being at 40% is not a good feat. It's not a good number. It's not a good look. It really doesn't look really at all beneficial for them. We're going to do a lot of looking back on history 2020. What you'll find here is that, the Democratic Party was up about 7 points nationwide. In 2018, they were up 7 points nationwide. In 2016, they were up a point nationwide. In 2016, they lost the popular vote. In 2018, they actually won by more than the polls predicted. And then in 2020, they ended up underperforming by about 4 percentage points nationwide. So the main takeaway here is that there are some cases in which the Democratic Party does actually outperform data, but generally speaking, you should expect the GOP to instead be outperforming where they were before and where they are currently expected to do so. But looking at the lead here for the Democratic Party, the lead here for the GOP, it isn't exactly too good. In 2018 and 2020, you saw that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were still polling at least enough to leave only about 7 to 8% undecided voters nationwide. In 2016, even in such a contentious election where people saw this as a lesser of two evils situation, the polling averages only left about 9% of voters undecided. What you're finding here is that a lot of voters are in fact undecided. Based off of where we are right now, about 16% of this poll from the one that matches the average most accurately shows that 16% of voters don't have an opinion. And 16% of voters is just over about 1 in 7. Just over about 1 in 7 people in this entire country that are planning on voting haven't made a decision about who they want to vote for or don't have an opinion on it yet. And that's why the GOP should be alarmed, because they have every means to actually take advantage of Joe Biden's situation, to take advantage of where they are nationally in terms of fundraising numbers, in terms of, Trump's approval rating rising nationwide. What I see here is an inability to perform up to expectation. And I've been saying this for the Republican Party for quite some time, that numbers such as this just simply shouldn't counteract and contradict each other by such a heavy amount. It's really, really not a good look, and I think it can be partially explained by what we see here. So you already see a significant portion of the nation that is undecided, but when it comes down to looking at those who are actually leading the undecided vote, it actually doesn't get much better for the Republican Party. You're talking about, first of all, younger voters that are the most undecided. You have ages 18 to 34 that do not know or don't have an opinion. That's 24% of them that say they don't have an opinion. I can tell you, looking at that lead there of about maybe 14 points is likely to expand. Looking at recent years, if you're looking from 18 to 29, not exactly the same age range, but you'll find that even in 2016, Clinton won them by 30. In 2018, the Democrats won them by 50. 2020, Biden won them by 24. You're looking at some pretty large leads here, and seeing them up only by 14 points probably isn't exactly going to max expectation. But considering that about 12% of 65 plus and 14% of 45 to 64 and 16% of 35 to 44 probably are going to vote for the GOP. These are voters that the Republican Party should rely on for heavy victories, and they simply aren't getting it. The 65 plus margin here shows that in 2020, while Biden did better than Hillary Clinton, there have been elections in which these demographic groups have backed the Republican Party. In 2016, Trump won them by 9. That was not necessarily as much of a red wave in terms of the generic ballot as we are expecting for 2022. In addition to, beyond that, you're looking at 50 to 64. You're looking at a 6-point victory here for Trump in 2016. Again, 2022 is expected to be a better year. When you're looking at the results, you might say, okay, the Republican Party is doing better. They're winning 65 plus by 8 points. They're winning 45 to 64 by 14 points. They're losing 35 to 44, but they were expected to lose by that amount. But again, taking leads nationwide means you have to outperform, and not outperform by just a small amount. You're looking at 14, 12, 16% of those electorates that Republicans should be performing better in than the youth, and they aren't winning over those voters. I think it should be a very easy answer for many of these voters that have voted for the Republican Party in the past, and that is backing them again. But surprisingly enough, it just simply isn't happening. When you take a look at those who are college-educated voters, you will find that the results here sort of match up with what we were expecting. Democrats are competitive amongst college-educated voters, typically lead them, especially considering postgraduate degrees. So you're talking master's, law, doctorate, etc. The Democratic Party wins them by 7. 8 points. You're looking at, or 9 points actually. You're looking at a bachelor's degree, Democrats, Republicans even, and then those without a college degree, you're talking about a 6-point lead for the GOP. But the GOP should be winning those without a college degree by likely a higher amount. I know they break it down by college level, so if we actually find here, in 2020, those with some college or less, you will find that Trump won them by 8 percentage points in 2020, actually up from 7 points back in 2016. The only difference here is that voters with a college degree ended up shifting towards the left. Which is what counteracted this, also led Biden to victory, but also, is interesting to see, shifted by an even larger amount relative to 2016 and 2018. But my point being is that these groups, those who do not have a college degree, are groups that the Republican Party continuously relies on in this entire country. And what you're finding is that 19% of them are undecided. The main takeaway from this is that you have a significant portion of this nation that is simply undecided, and it really isn't a good look. I think there are voters out there that were willing to vote for the Republican Party of 2010 and 2014 that are not willing to vote for the Republican Party of 2022, or at least answer in a poll confidently or more so consciously that they are voting for the GOP. I do expect the Republican Party to win the national popular vote. I think I have been very clear that I expect the Republican Party at least to win control of the House and control of the Senate, and I stand by that point. I think looking at the data here, the Republican Party is likely up more than we are currently expecting and currently seeing, but I'm not seeing large margins like what I saw in 2014 or 2010, and I have made a point of that multiple times as well. The hesitancy is being led by voters who are undecided, who should already have an opinion. And it might go to show that the Democratic Party doesn't necessarily have as much of an ability to win them over as much as the Republican Party has an ability to push them away. I think voters, especially those in the suburbs, you're talking about the white suburban soccer mom. You're talking about a voting group that continuously has pushed away from the GOP, that is not willing to vote for the GOP in confidence, that might end up doing it out of a pushback on Biden, out of a pushback on the Democratic Party. But there's a reason why you saw demographic shifts and you saw shifts in electorate votes in the suburbs, in the outskirt regions for Democratic voters, for Joe Biden, when you saw the 2020 election results. There's a reason why suburban shifts benefited Biden. There are plenty of suburban areas that voted for Trump in 2016 that voted for Biden in 2020. And I think a lot of that hesitancy, a lot of that primarily led by, white women across the nation who make up a significant portion of the suburban population. And, you're seeing that shift. I would say that, if we're looking at it based off of minority shifts in 2016 to 2020, one would probably predict that Trump won the election, looking at that alone. You saw Donald Trump improve amongst every single minority group in this entire nation relative to 2016. Where did Biden do better? Amongst white voters that make up the majority of the electorate. Now, not to say that Democrats aren't going to be able to walk back the progress that Donald Trump has made amongst minority voters. I think that is a very realistic possibility, but it also means that the progress that Joe Biden made is likely eroded now with his level of unpopularity. It just simply isn't being reflected in super easily by the polls. There's a lot of hesitant voters out there, and I think it's very increasingly more obvious. Even now, the Republican Party remains more unpopular than the Democratic Party, even though the Democrats are being deemed responsible for inflation and gas prices and everything of that sort because they're the trifecta in power. And it really becomes difficult for Democrats to argue, continue electing us, because right now the American public sees it and says, you've actually done worse for us. And yet even that, the Democratic Party remains the popular party relative to the GOP. You can also see this with Gallup polling that shows the Democrats about 3 points ahead of the GOP. If anything, the GOP should be at a much higher position, back where they were, when you're talking the 2002 type of range, or going into an election such as 2020, where Republicans for the first time ended up overcoming the Democratic Party in about 2 years, getting 51% of voters on their side in terms of a favorable approval rating. That's dipped 11 points since the beginning of the 2020 election year. So there's definitely been a lot of changes and a lot of different changes in perception and willingness to support the Republican Party. A lot of that has been inflicted by President Trump and people of his stature. You have people who are pushing away voters based off of their rhetoric and what is seemingly radical to those who were otherwise swing and competitive voters that still lean towards the GOP. Again, I have no doubt the GOP reclaims control of the House and the Senate, but it isn't being made easy for them simply because they don't have this umbrella party ability like they used to when they had the Tea Party or the 2014 wave of the anti-government, the anti-Democratic Party wave that they had. It just simply isn't coming to fruition, and I think that it very well could as the months proceed. But for right now, I'm not personally impressed by the GOP's ability, or lack thereof, to win over voters in the 2022 generic congressional vote. There definitely is a larger lead than we are currently expecting, but nowhere near Joe Biden, his approval rating, or his disapproval rating rather, which is a very alarming thing for the GOP. As we saw under Obama, you don't always need it because you can sometimes do better. And I don't think that's the case for Joe Biden. I think the Republican Party has a tainted name for right now, and they need to do a lot in terms of character rebuilding and character fixing, and that isn't something that can be done overnight. So they need to focus on that heading into 2022, because at the end of the day, it isn't going to be an easy feat, and it's going to be something that could truly hand them much larger victories than what they are currently expecting or currently predicted to get, that could be done with a very simple fix of primarily moving your party image in a more better direction, and it is something that the Democratic Party did effectively back in 2020, and what has likely won them the presidency that election year. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join, and on the screen there's a video you can watch. At the bottom of the screen, there's a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. There is a subscriber feedback form on my YouTube community channel, so I would recommend checking that out. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.